This presentation is to help you better understand how to focus your message by determining the basic takeaways of your message and how to work them into your presentation. First, what is a takeaway? Well, it is the bottom line, the most simplified, to the point, memorable point or points of your presentation, which is the delivery of your message, the format of your delivery of your message. In this case, it's a slideshow. It is what the audience will keep with them long after the presentation is over. It is the very essence of the message, boiled down, the whole point of the presentation, the message. It should be at the heart of the message point you want the audience to take away. You don't understand that, they won't understand that. If the audience doesn't get it, these main points of your message, they don't get the basically purpose of what you're trying to communicate, then it may be too complicated for them. It's presented unclearly. Maybe it was unclear to you. Maybe you didn't understand the message, at least to the point where you could simplify it enough that they could understand it. Because if you don't understand it, how are you going to organize it and present it to them? So let's look at an example of what one presenter intends to communicate with a presentation on the topic of post-production editing. Okay, these are three excellent descriptions of his intentions of communicating and getting the points he wants to get across in the presentation about post-production editing. First one, audience learns what post-production editing is, says definition, and the elements involved in order to better understand the presentation. Well, now this is a general statement about what will be learned. It is not a takeaway point. Previous methods of video and sound editing are described so that the audience can greater understand differences between past and modern methods of editing. Now this clearly gives an overview of what is to be presented. I'd want to sign up for this session if this is what they were going to be talking about. I wanted to go to the presentation so I would know what to do about this, okay? But it does not exactly state the specific point or points that the presenter wants to make, that conclusions that will be made, what you will be taking away from that presentation. And the third one, modern methods and tools of editing are discussed so that the audience better understands the modern processes involved in editing and their advancements over previous methods. Certainly these three intentions of what is to be communicated in this session are excellent descriptions of what it will be about. But alas, none of them deliver specific takeaway points that after the presentation is over, the audience can say, oh, I got this, this, and this, and I'll do something about it. So let's look at intent number one. Let's focus on the talking points, okay? What exactly you want the audience to make part of their understanding as a result of intent number one. Ask specific questions that you want your presentation to answer. In this case, define what post-production editing is. Define it. List the elements involved. Intent number two, why don't you just, tell the differences between the past and modern methods of editing. Very clear, crisp, to the point, in one sentence. And lastly, just list the elements of the modern process. Okay? If there's too many elements to remember, maybe that ought to be a separate presentation. Give specific answers to these questions. Don't be vague to any of these questions. Be specific. What exactly do you expect the audience to take away? Your points above, the intentions of communicating, are really just a description of what the audience was to understand. In this instance, that's all they were. They were not a list of takeaways. So how do we get to that list? Well, by doing this, identifying your takeaways, you're getting to the specific purpose, the essence of your message. It will also help you develop an outline for how you'll be presenting or delivering the information that will answer these questions. If you don't know the answers to these questions, do the research. You must understand the message before you can begin to put it together. By identifying them as the key takeaway points, you're beginning to focus on the very core of your message. and that which will be the very guts of your presentation. Then you can do an outline. An outline organizes the information to be presented. Here we have 3 main points from those that had been presented as the intentions, and they become a blueprint for the assembling of the presentation and the delivery of the message. The more detail you show, the better. In fact, each line item should be a separate slide, and try not to say too many things in a particular slide. Now, in this specific example, these 3 intentions, you might notice that there's a lot here. A lot of points to be made to try to communicate all of this and expect the audience to understand all that and take it away with them in a simple 10 to 15 minute presentation. So you may want to concentrate on simplifying that message. Let me give you an example here, okay? Let's look at delivering the message to the audience, an example of it, and in a way that the audience has no trouble taking away from the presentation of the message, of the main points, okay? The employee meeting talked about where the boss explains to his workers the importance and promptness on the job. He wants them to check in on time. He gives them the policy. He gives examples. He tells them about how what excuses are tolerable and what they're not and how they're to be handled, etc. Okay? Building up an understanding, building up some sort of a focus and a point. However, the bottom line, the reason I called you here today, what's the one thing or 2 or 3 things that you must know? Sure that everybody understands at the end of the presentation. Okay? In this case, if you show up late, you will be fired. That is the takeaway. The entire intent of the 10-minute presentation of the boss's message boiled down. The presentation is just to make sure that the audience, his employees, really understand what he is saying. Now, if the audience didn't get that, they didn't get the takeaway, that message, then the sender of that message has failed to communicate. He just really didn't hit the nail on the head, so to speak. So let's look at 3 points to be made from the intentions that we had previously described that this presentation is going to try to deliver, the points that it's trying to deliver. These will be the takeaways. So, point 1, or takeaway number 1, post-production editing is the process of assembling all of the best and most appropriate footage shot and sound recorded for a presentation be put together so that it can then be polished with transitions and special effects. Kind of pretty good definition of that. Kind of understand that. And usually takes more time than the actual shooting. It involves the compiling of the best of the sound, video, film pieces for the final presentation. And it's time consuming. Point 2, linear versus nonlinear. Past versus present editing. In the past, it involved physically going through all of the tape or film from beginning to end and removing what wasn't wanted, which ended up on the cutting room floor, so to speak. Today, it's done digitally, and the content is assessed randomly, as you would access files on a DVD or on your hard drive. And the third take-home point, software like this industry standard Final Cut Pro is what is used today to produce non-linear editing professionally. Okay, so I presented here 3 points at the end of my presentation, which kind of determines my outline, which will determine all the details and everything that I would be including in my presentation. Now let's take a look at this overall presentation on takeaways. What are the takeaways on this presentation on takeaways? 3 points I want to make. All you see is type on the screen here. But I want you to understand that takeaways you should determine what your audience is to get from your presentation. You be specific, be practical, state them. Second, organize your content or the information that will cover all of these points. And then you structure and put it, assemble it together in a certain way. And then you keep focused on the takeaways during the entire presentation. All content should support these points. And if they don't support those takeaway points, just exclude them. It's just noise, okay? Now, make a point here. This slide took me a long time to go over because there's a lot of words on it. Let's talk about some takeaways on slides, okay? I'm going to make 3 takeaway points on slides, and I'm using 3 slides to make these 3 takeaway points. So in the presentation, the slides are just your visual support. They capture the attention. They, illustrate a single point. And they just become the supplement to the verbal, because the verbal is the actual presentation. What I am telling you now is the presentation. If you know your message, you should know specifically what you want the audience to get. If you determine these takeaways first, the entire presentation will be easier. And make them no more than 30 seconds. That was my 30 seconds timer. Second point, that each slide should contain a major visual element. Like in this example, look, I've got a dominant element, visual pun here, but the point is it drew your attention in. To talk about, that's the point I want to make. And lastly, what copy you do have on the screen should be very minimal. Your voiceover, your presentation, is the actual messaging that you're doing. Anything that's verbal on the screen is only what is absolutely necessary. It shouldn't compete with what you're saying. It should supplement it, should coincide with that image that you have on the screen.